Previously on Just BS Woodworking.
So I'm going to call this part 1 of the video. Whether there'll be a part 2 or not, I don't know. I'm going to walk away from it because I've spent hours on it today, hours in the past, and decide what I'm going to do.
I'll tell you exactly what I did. I got back on the horse. This footage might look a little bit darker than the rest of the video because this was back in April when I first started the table, hence the coat. Now here I'm running some pallet stretchers through the planer thicknesser. Now these pallet stretchers were massive. They were from a huge great big pallet. The slats themselves weren't actually that good, but these stretchers will make perfect table legs. Once they were milled down and relatively square, I got to work on the shape of the legs themselves. Now the design is not going to be complicated, so to add a bit of finesse, if you like, I wanted the legs to be slightly tapered. Nothing huge, just enough to give it some character.
So I've brought you in for a bit of a closer look. The idea is that I want the tapers to be on the inside. Otherwise, you lose stability if it tapers to the middle. And this is a heavy coffee table. So all I've done is I've marked out my square bits that are going to sit at the top. And then they're going to be tapered to this halfway point. So with one cut, I should be able to make 2 legs. And then with 2 cuts, I should be able to make 4 legs. In theory.
Now there are several ways of making a cut like this, and most of the ways involve some kind of setup on the table saw. I hate my table saw and refuse to use it wherever I can avoid it. So I created a bit of a setup using the track saw. Now to do this I laid a sheet of old packaging foam down, laid the legs on top, laid the track on top of that, applied some clamps wherever they would fit, and the theory being that I could with one cut create 2 legs. I'm not wanting to blow my own trumpet, but this actually worked out perfectly. There was enough clamping pressure to stop the track from moving, and I was left with this spear. But obviously 2 of them, and they're going to create my tapered legs. Obviously I didn't want legs that could impale a small child that tipped the table upside down, so I cut those spiky bits off the bottom, all at the same length over on the miter saw.
Now, I said I was a genius. But as much as I love a track saw, it does have its limits. So you can see through a bit of travel with the track and the blade, some of these are slightly off, but we're talking 0.5 millimetre. By the time I've routed these over and given them a good sand, I'm hoping you won't spot that. Now that's kind of what I'm thinking for the legs. Obviously they're really blocky at the minute. I'm going to try and round over the whole thing with a palm router once they're glued together. My only concern is, even though I've made the taper outwards, will this be stable enough to stop the table tipping? Now the reason I want them so narrow is because I really want them to fit in between this gap here. So I rabbited this MDF into the frame, and I just think it's got a better look if this sits in it. But I've somehow got to test this and figure out the racking that way. Okay, my test has proven inconclusive. Because the legs aren't secured, I've really wanted to get an idea of whether it tips that way, but all that's happening is the legs are wobbling. I don't know whether to angle the legs outwards and see if that would make much of a difference.
I chose not to do that because it was a stupid idea. Instead, what I did was I just glued up the sections that I already had, and I decided I was going to put a bit of a skirt between the 2 legs. Number 1, this would maybe look alright, and number 2, it would give it a really rigid structure, and this turned out to be very, very strong. And after leaving the glue on those leg sections to glue up overnight, I then came back through and I put those joining beams, skirts, I think you call them skirts, between the 2. Now this is just framing timber I'm using for the skirts because I didn't have any of those stretchers that were long enough. With the glue set on that the next day, I then came through with a round over bit. Now I pretty much just rounded over absolutely everything apart from the point where the table will sit on top of the frame. I want that to be a snug fit, so I don't want to mess around rounding that over. So after rounding it over, filling the odd crack, and then sanding a little bit, and then sanding more, and then sanding more, and then sanding more, I was left with quite a nice looking table base. We now fast forward to the present day.
So those of you that have kept up to date with my feed on YouTube will know that unfortunately found some issues with my house. So my time now is just dedicated purely to work and the house. I'm desperate to get this table done. For all of you guys that told me to keep going and showed me support and gave me advice, the advice was amazing. But my main motivation to do this is because there is a legend in this world called DaveG from DaveG Designs. Check him out on Instagram. The man is a wizard with turning and epoxy and creating these amazing looking things. He's also on YouTube and showed recently how to make a Viking bowl that he turned. Like, the guy is a wizard. But what my main point is the awesomeness in this world is incredible, because Dave saw my struggles and he sent me this. Now, this was one of the things standing in my way. I didn't want to spend more money on a buffing machine for a project that I don't even know is going to work. But Dave hooked me up, sent it, asked for my address, and over Instagram he's been giving me so much advice, so many tips. The bloke is a legend. Please go check him out on Instagram, go sub to him on YouTube. He is a wizard. But because of his kindness, I can't let this go to waste. I need to finish it, but I just need to figure out these air bubbles first.
One of the barriers that really stood in the way of me finishing this table was the air bubbles that had appeared. They are tiny, they are minute, and you will not see them apart from the fact that they are full of sanding dust.
Okay, I found something that I think works and it's making me happy. So what I've been doing is flooding it with water, and then I've given up trying to squeeze that in. Then I'm just using the sharp side of the pin to gently agitate the dust a little bit that's in there. And I've got 3, although I've done a decent job with the other 2. I can't find them now. I'll call that a win. If I can't find them, then hopefully whoever buys this table won't find them. Then I aim the squirty part and use it like a water pistol to get in there, and it seems to move the dust just enough that I think I can get away with that now. It'll still be visible. I put glue in there, it's still going to be visible, but before it was a speck of white in an area where there is no white. So I'll take that one as a win. Right. Do you know what's not a win? I'm at 400 grit at the minute, and I think I've got to go to 1,000.
Love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something.
I do not like wearing a respirator. However, I also don't like epoxy in my lungs. Excuse any marks on my face. I don't particularly like a respirator because it doesn't fit this mug. Now, I've taken it to 800 grit. I think I'm going to leave it there. I would like the epoxy surface to be level with the wood surface, but what I'm finding is if I sneak onto that wood surface with even the 600 grit, let alone the 800 that I've just done, then it brings the dust on and it's actually starting to scratch the epoxy. I'm guessing because pine's too soft or something like that. So I don't want to cause any more damage. And have a look at this. So between each sanding pass, I come along and I spray it just lightly, and then with a clean-ish rag, I come over wipe away the dust, and then do that same grit again, swapping out the pads as soon as they are filthy. It is the epoxy left over on the pads, let me show you some, like that cannot be used. Okay, it doesn't brush off. If you use that, that's when you get the swirl marks. My first time round, before I went back and resanded this whole thing, that's what I found. So when I sprayed it, I was quite happy. So I think I'm going to leave it. However, before I buff it up, lots more needs to happen. This is a ridiculous project. I don't know what I was thinking. So I'm going to round over the top edge because, like other people said, it looks too square and boxy. Then I've got to treat the side because you cannot use the buffing compound on the raw wood because then that won't take a treatment. Then I'll have to leave that stain or oil or whatever I'm going to use to soak in, wait, come back, finish that. Then I can do the buffing compound. I've also got to paint the legs. This is a ridiculous project. Without charging like £1,000 for this, there is no way you are getting paid any kind of hourly rate. Been fun though.
And I wasn't lying when I said that. It has been fun. This project has given me such a headache and it's made me want to quit at so many points. However, you can't match that feeling of a challenge and overcoming that challenge and things actually working out. Like, it might not be as perfect as I want it to be, but the way it's worked out, I'd take that learning experience over perfection the first time any day. I rounded over the top of the table with a round over bit in the palm router. I really liked the look of this, but I didn't think it would fit if I did that on the bottom of the table as well. Although I don't want a boxy look, I don't really want the whole table to be rounded over, so I went for a 45-degree bit on that one.
This is why you shouldn't do woodworking when you're tired and can't think straight. I loaded up my 45 router bit in there and I was going to do a 45 on the bottom instead of a round over. And I've got two bits that are 45. One's got a bearing on, so you could do flush cuts. Put the wrong one in, didn't I? Now I've got a giant divot out the bottom of my table. Woodworking's so much fun. It's such a good release from everyday life.
Once I'd stopped being such an idiot, I decided to use my flush cut 45 bit, and that worked out really well. It didn't completely get rid of that divot, it was far too deep, but it did a fairly decent job. And it's going to be on the underside of the table, so maybe I won't notice it because at this point I can't imagine selling this project. After routing everything just needed a quick sand. I used a sanding pad with my hand, which is even sadder than regular sanding with a power tool. Unbelievable. With it all sanded down, I applied some Danish oil. Now, I've not really used Danish oil for a while because when I use it on pine, I do know that it yellows it. I like that it brings out the grain and the knots and everything, but I don't like that yellowing. However, I plan on painting the legs black, so I figured the yellowish colour will complement the black colour and it'll be a nice contrast. So I'm applying 2 coats of Danish oil in total and then some wax. I like Danish oil because it's so easy to use. You slather it on and then leave it 20 minutes and then you come back with a clean rag and you just kind of buff it off. You wipe off any of the excess, the wood takes what it needs, you come back 12 hours later and you can apply another coat. And in between that I also started to work on the legs.
So I've gone over everything with the orbital sander. I've gone over at 120 grit. I'm actually going to go to 180, but before I do that, I've got to fix some of these holes here. This is actually recycled from my old workbench, so unfortunately, it's got some screw holes to fill. Now, the reason I'm going to 180 is because I want a nice smooth finish, but not too smooth because I'm actually going to paint the base black, which is why I can get away with filling the holes with wood filler and don't have to mess around with sawdust or anything like that. So what I was told about wood filler, and previously not done this, is I always used to use it as if you're filling a wall and you go like that and try and get everything flat. But the thing is, sandpaper goes through this quite easily. So the idea is to leave it just a bit proud, and then afterwards you don't have to deal with the filler sagging down. Whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, I saw it on TikTok, so must be right, surely.
Once the filler had time to cure, I did my shaky dance, which is very graceful, and applied some black furniture paint to the legs. I got this furniture paint from B&Q. It wasn't the cheapest, but also not the most expensive. This stuff needs 12 hours to cure before you can apply another coat. On the back of the tin it says 2 to 3 coats, but it's really thick and it acts as a primer as well, so it says on the tin. And I did find that the first coat was really difficult to put on and took loads of paint. However, it dried very smooth, no brush marks, so after 12 hours I came back, put a second coat on, and then had to wait another 12 hours.
It's the final stage. And the theme of this entire project has been doing things that every time I do them, I feel like this will be the thing that ruins the whole project. Like literally from the start. Should I use OSB? Might ruin it. Should I put coins in? Might look silly. Should I bother with epoxy? Probably not. Should I then try and paint the legs black? Don't know, might look useless. Every single thing I've done in this project has been new to me and has pushed me. That's a good thing. You should be pushed. I'd love to be able to crank out loads of the same project and make loads of money. But at the same time, I do love a challenge. Now, the thing that might ruin this is I've got this buffer that DaveG sent me. I also heard that you can use Tcut, which is £8 a can, instead of £35 for a little thimble size of buffing compound. Now, I've already accepted that this project is probably going to be a failure. So what does it matter if I mess this up as well? Oh God. Is that too much? What's the right amount?
I didn't know what the right amount was. But then again, I didn't know anything about any part of this project. Every single part of it has been new to me. Can you use OSB? Can you rebate it into bits of structural pine? Can you make legs that are tapered using a track saw? Can you pour epoxy and it be successful? Every single element of this project has been new to me. And as much as it's hurt my brain and caused me sadness, I've enjoyed every challenge I've come across, and it has made me really happy. So I gave it one run through with Tcut and this buffer. After that, I then wiped it with a dry rag, and then I did it again. I don't know how many times you're supposed to do this. What I do know is they were absolutely bang on with what they said about finishing the wood first. Because I finished the wood with oil and wax, this Tcut had absolutely no impact on the wood itself. So after the second pass and wiping it clean, I was left with this weird feeling. This project that I started in April was finished. It was done.
She's done. Now, before I go over anything, why am I sitting out in the garden? Well, my house is currently a building site, hence why the glamour shots, if you like, had to be done out on grass. This is not an outdoor table, but I've got nowhere to film inside. This project has taken about 4 months in total. That's not 4 months of working non-stop, that's 4 months because of setbacks and failures and barriers and not knowing what I'm doing and life getting in the way. But I'm so glad I stuck with it like you guys wanted me to. I am very, very, very glad I've seen it through because I've learned so much. One of the things I've learned is about contrast. The black legs with the yellowish of the pine with the smoky grey top. The contrast is amazing. I think it's turned out absolutely fantastic. I've learnt more about working with epoxy. I've learnt more about finishing epoxy, about sanding epoxy. But the best thing I've learned through all of this is that you guys are heroes. I've watched a ton of YouTube videos trying to figure all this out, but my main learning has come from you guys in the comments and from absolute heroes like Dave, who sent me that buffer and who has been available on Instagram and talked me through a load of things. You know, you guys are absolute heroes. Would I do this again? Not quickly, but yeah, I would. Because although it's been an absolute nightmare, I have learned an absolute ton. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. Take care. Bye-bye.